And we are back. It's the Regeneration Podcast. And sometimes I don't come back to the chair I'm sitting in since within 2 seconds of when we sign off on the previous podcast. I just kind of have this table in this weird room. But I have a note to myself, Call of the Human Being. Was that a book that you recommended? Does that ring a
Not
bell?
me. Nope.
Interesting. I'll have to read it.
Did I write it?
Could have been. What are you reading now?
What am I? Maybe you can help me with this.
All right,
So,
we'll see.
I read stuff all the time, and but the two things I'm reading for myself are, here it is. Uh, Gary Lockman's
Oh,
The
wow.
Return of Holy Russia, which he's a
What's
good
that? What's
writer.
that title? I'm sorry.
The Return of Holy Russia.
Huh,
I'm reading that one. Now, I don't know if you know him.
I
He
do.
wrote a really good biography, probably the only good biography I've read about Rudolf Steiner.
And
And
he's
he's
a rock musician, right?
well, he used to be in Blondie.
Yeah, right, right. That's funny.
So yeah, but he writes really well. I mean, he does good. He writes in a non-academic but highly informative and intellectual way.
Yeah.
And it's refreshing to read that, especially after reading academic prose.
And
It's like
what's his theory? I think that theme
I
would
don't,
be of interest
I
to
don't
a
know
lot
if
of
he
our
has a
listeners.
theory. He's just kind of going through, how weird Russia is, because starting with he starts with the Silver Age, but actually
Yeah.
the first sentence in the book, I was surprised, even though I shouldn't have been. In 1906, the spiritual scientist Rudolf Steiner, then the head of the
Oh,
German
wow. Yeah.
yeah, first sentence says Rudolf Steiner.
What did you think when
Not
Carol
surprised.
Johnson, go ahead, but when Carol Johnson said Rosenstock, um, met Steiner and was kind of weirded out. I forget exactly what she said. I also remember in Berdyaev's autobiography, he had heard Steiner and just like was kind of turned off by the guy. And
He
I'm
was,
not, yeah. What's
but
your
he
sense for
actually,
those encounters?
but he also, in Berdyaev in particular, writes, um, I wouldn't say approvingly, but certainly positively about Steiner in a number of places
Okay.
throughout
Yeah.
his work. I mean, he's not all in, but he thinks he's interesting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's because Berdyaev's friend
That's where I am.
Andre
So
Belly,
interesting.
Andre Belly, I can't remember his real name, Boris something, Boris Gleb, whatever it is. He was all in on Steiner, and actually he
Right.
wrote a surrealist novel, uh, Petersburg, which
Mhm.
I haven't read. I haven't had a chance to really get into it, but maybe I'll read it because when I'm reading this is because I'm reading that, and I in the on deck circle is Not in His Image by John
Um,
Lamb Lash. Do you know this guy?
let me see. J.M. Lash? No,
John
I do.
Lamb Lash, and it's the subtitle is Gnostic Vision, Sacred Ecology, and the Future of Belief.
Huh. No, I know Nicholas Lash, great theologian, Christopher
Yeah,
Lash, but I don't
Christopher
know
Lash.
your life. Yeah, yeah.
But I'm reading. I mean,
So
this.
your end goal here is what, like,
Well, I have next summer. I'm giving a lecture, a keynote like lecture to. Don't know the exact name of the conference. It's like the international conference. It's not the right word. Of the Russian Byzantine Catholic Church
oh, you had mentioned that. That's
in the
interesting.
Czech Republic. And so and the reason I'm starting to read about it now, I'm reading stuff that I haven't read because
Yeah.
all I have to do is go through my notes on Soloviev and the rest of those guys. Um, uh, but the reason I'm doing it now is because I want to get it. They would like me to have it done by January or so, so I can so they can translate it. I don't know into what language. It's probably Russian
Okay.
and Czech, or I don't know what they're. So
Interesting.
so that's what I'm working on it.
Hmm.
But I'm also reading, and I'm actually enjoying Dion Fortune. Do you know who that is?
I do very well. Because Greer is a big promoter of hers.
Yeah,
So I've
but
read a few of her novels, right?
which
That was my entrance point. Yeah,
did you read The Sea Priestess?
I certainly did.
That's the one I'm reading.
And then there's a sequel or a prequel.
I think there's a
That
prequel. Yeah.
yeah.
What surprised me though, and I read her book, The Mystical Kabbalah. I don't know, maybe I was 24.
I read her on Marriage or something. That
But
kind of same
what
thing.
surprises me in this novel is it's kind of funny. It's very droll. You really a
Hmm.
kind of a
Hmm.
dry British sense of humor, which I
Yeah,
did not
there's a
expect, and it's kind of nice to. to
Yeah,
read.
there's certain turns of phrases. You know how certain writers enter your own speech?
Yeah.
I think I've heard it, maybe more, but she was the first place that I ever read the phrase, because there's that kind of like dud guy, right?
Yeah.
Who's coming to life. But he said, she said, the author, Dion Fortune, said he did this on the regular. On
Yeah.
the regular. Yeah. And I use that all the time. Like I'm doing this on the regular.
Yeah.
And that for me, that was the first I'd ever seen that. Yeah, she's quirky. She's quirky.
Yeah, it's enjoyable. And
She worked for the
actually,
British Secret Service,
I
right?
do remember the Mystical Kabbalah, even though I was not a judge of writing at the time. It was a pretty enjoyable read, informative.
Mhm.
And I guess she was also a Jungian analyst, which doesn't
Well,
surprise me, right?
yeah, yeah.
So that's what I've been looking at.
Here's stuff. Let me
Question.
show this one too, very briefly. This is we talked about Rosenstock last week.
Oh yeah, there you
I
go.
have this thing on 70s looking book covers for young kind of trads of any kind, just young conservatives. This would make them allergic, Planetary
Oh
Service, and
yeah,
it's
no, for
and it's
sure.
Rosenstock. And I'm telling people, if they know who I am from this podcast, this is put down your Oswald Spengler and read this guy. This is so relevant. It's 30 years ahead. It has a role for the strenuous life. Really martial in a sense that he's taking William James. We need a moral substitute for war, but he said this is not the Peace Corps. This is not 2 weeks. But this guy was always involved in turning boys into men, and he knew we needed to do this in a regular way, not collecting, ideas, but turning boys into men, or we're going to have World War III, right? So that's it's as timely as anything.
Yeah, no
But
kidding.
something as bland as the Peace Corps could turn us off to this idea or a certain form of globalism would turn us off to this idea. So Planetary Service with this gaudy title is as edgy and revolutionary as a book as one could find. But I cut
And
you off. Tell me.
no, but speaking of reading, so here's the thing. Now, I don't know. This is going to sound weird. I don't know if it was on somebody's Substack or or a book. And I'm not reading that many books right now. Or if it was a book I was editing, which I don't think it was. But I ran into something, and I'm not kidding. I could have dreamt this.
Mhm.
I ran into something this week, and I remembered reading it, and I wanted to tell my wife about it this morning that there was something about setting the day for Easter in the Catholic Church that they wanted to get it right. This is like back in the, early days of the Middle Ages, maybe.
All
That
right.
they really wanted to get the date right because if they didn't get the date for Easter right, it could trigger the apocalypse or something like
Yeah,
that.
right, right.
Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, in a sense, I think it's come up once before on the podcast. But that's how would you then unpack that? Like you would
Well,
call that a
I don't care how
fetishism
to
or something.
unpack it. I just want to see where I read it.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay, yeah. Let me
And so
think.
if you don't know,
Mhm.
maybe one of our listeners does.
I wonder if in the
I've been ripping my
literature.
house apart today. Where the hell is that
Yeah.
reference?
Okay. Have
Right?
you tried AI?
I did, and it was no help.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah.
why after I tried AI, I
Okay.
was
Isn't
like,
that funny? Because yeah,
maybe I did have a dream about it.
if somebody mentioned that to me, I would say I'd heard that before, but it was from you, and it was that one time.
Yeah,
But
I
I
mean,
don't remember what you said it was from.
no, I've heard there's kind of a lot of cool, weird stuff about Easter and Good Friday
You bet there is.
and you know, the days of creation and all that stuff that are all
Mhm.
connected and the Annunciation. So all those dates are kind of connected.
Yeah.
But I cannot for the life of me remember if I read that or if I dreamt it.
Huh. Yeah. If it comes to me, this podcast, what I'm thinking that so you don't even have to go back through the old podcast that you didn't mention where you got it when you brought it up, and I've got
Yeah.
a pretty good memory for context and things
And
like
I'm
that.
and I'm guessing it could have been on somebody's Substack,
Hmm.
but I don't know.
Yeah.
You know,
I
I
want to
just
let our listeners know too. Pretty soon we're going to have a guest signing in. Um, his name is Philip Balboni, and his story is going to be interesting, Michael. It's just a young,
looking forward to it.
he's a young guy who I think eventually happened upon magna cum laude, so he doesn't have to sing his own praises. You could Google his name, but and it's not like he's promoting it, but their CVs are online. But magna cum laude at Columbia for a couple of undergrad and a couple, maybe a grad degrees, and then I think Berkeley for a PhD in anthropology or maybe economics. But he's a guy who's red pilled. We don't use that phrase too much, but it seems like where that's what we're always trying to do, not pull back the curtains, but speak from. I look at your work, Michael. In fact, I remembered writing a review of Transfiguration that you're trying to talk beyond the breach, right? Not just you're talking about starting to live beyond this stuff. But Philip started seeing behind the curtains, and then he discovered again the work of Preparata, was writing to Guido, who will join us any week, maybe with Philip again. And Guido has a new book coming out that's whoa, it's red hot.
Oh,
It's
what's
on
this one?
race. It's on race.
Oh man.
It's my son read it, kind of proofing it. And because he can have a real scientific mind, right? You
Oh,
have a
yeah.
relaxed European looking at race in America, and it's a completely different way of talking about it, right? Because it is, as Wendell Berry says, we have people who think it's the only thing, then we have a lot of conservatives think it's well behind us. But Wendell Berry still calls it the hidden wound, right? And we can't just turn into ideologues one way or another. This thing is with us. We didn't intermarry much in this continent early on.
You
Again,
know what?
and race is a thing still going on. What do you think of?
So my theory about intermarriage, um, it depends. So
I'm not saying like it should be a program by
no.
any
I
stretch.
mean
Yeah,
from the beginning of the nation,
yeah,
not I don't mean the Native Americans, but I mean when the European settlers got here. Uh, it was typical, and this is for the French to intermarry
oh,
with.
sure. That's the Catholic thing, kind of. And I'm not trying to get into
Oh,
polemics.
you're right. I mean, this is what I think it is,
Totally, 100%.
and which is why my wife she's got
Yeah,
some Indian blood. You can tell by looking at her. Actually, one of
yeah.
my son Aiden looks like he could be like a cigar store Indian. He looks pretty native. Um, because a couple of my kids have like olive skin, and he's one of them. And
Yeah, especially
he's
with the
got long
Celtic.
black hair, and he
Yeah,
looks.
he's got a Celtic pasty white name, Aiden, and
He
he's
does,
got
and
this
he
black
doesn't
hair.
look.
Yeah,
Doesn't look Celtic and pasty.
yeah,
But yeah, so the French voyageurs here in Michigan would intermarry with Indians, no problem.
yeah,
Whereas the British, it was the last thing they would ever do.
yeah. Right.
They kept the race pure,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So it's a very Protestant versus Catholic thing, I think.
For sure, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure. And that's when people
imagine.
they talk about the British Empire and like its role in some stuff, which is a big theme for people. Again, it's a complex notion here. A lot of it is like how was things like when you look at empires, how is race managed?
And
And Guido's book and how is race managed and how will it be managed,
well, it's also
in
and
the
it's
future.
managed to actually and this goes back to Barack Obama,
Yeah.
right? Race is managed to manage power because as long as you keep people divided, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
And that was the weirdest thing, right? When we elect Barack Obama, you were you elected a black man to the office of the president of the United States. And that wasn't enough. Then the rhetoric became now it's we could have said right there we're beyond race. We could have said that.
It was
Whether
a
it was
good feeling that day, wasn't it? In one sense, I didn't think it was the
well, I
beginning of the
hated him, but
apocalypse. Yeah, yeah, but
but
that part,
I'll take
he
that
wasn't
part of
my
it. Yeah.
candidate. Yeah, 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 exactly. We feel the same way.
Yeah.
But
But the thing is then he immediately, and I have to say him, immediately it turned into, well, you think you're not racist, but you still are. Now you have systematic racism.
yeah,
You're never going to be free of this guilt.
well, I won't reveal like
It's
the
original sin, right?
agreed. But I think the way Guido's previous book, I won't reveal exactly what's going on in this new one. But people, if they can, read. It's very unique on this whole thing of race, or less so, but political correctness and how it's managed. She's got a new thing. It's the best. When I say new, I mean he wrote it a long time ago, but nobody's kind of equaled it. But to read the ideology of tyranny, because there's still the management of the race piece, which is bigger than Obama by far. That the people calling the shots, how
Well, it's
race is
not,
going to be
but I
played.
I
Yeah,
think Obama is bigger than Obama.
maybe. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. In one
You know what I
sense,
mean?
sure.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yep.
think as we have seen, there's a P.
There
There's
he
a
is.
person. There he is.
Yes, there is a person. There is a person
Meet
inside
the
of a car.
person.
Now, Philip, this works for us. Does it work for you? Are you comfortable?
Very comfortable. Very
Great,
comfortable.
great, great.
The passenger car seat is actually no. Sincerely, it's actually
Yeah.
it's quite comfortable. It's yeah, a strange mix of circumstances. I thought maybe I would go to a park, but then it started to rain.
Okay.
Ah,
But then I thought, oh, we have a vehicle, and I can take refuge in there.
That's
oh,
great.
you're lucky. I
Yeah.
can't get a signal where I live to save my life, so I'm stuck being in the house.
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny. Living in Boston and before that in Berkeley, California, I almost never had signal. And then suddenly we moved to Rhode Island, and now my phone works everywhere.
Isn't that
So
funny?
I think Providence is clearly the promised land.
It's providential.
It's
Yeah.
providential.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Hey,
Exactly.
Philip, I was kind of telling your story. Michael and I were kind of talking about everything and nothing, but I think some of it uh, will weave into your tale. But I had been introducing you kind of to our guests before your arrival, and I'll have you kind of tell the story. But I mentioned you're kind of you've got a story of being kind of red pilled, and it's not. I don't want to say it's completely different than others, but again, it's for somebody. I think you've been very serious about studies for a long time. I think very, and all of a sudden, things started happening in your life. Just kind of like tell the tale of where we're talking to you right now, in a way that you're familiar with the podcast, you're somewhat familiar with Michael's work, that, you
Yeah.
think our guests would be relevant. I know you're eminently capable of doing that.
Oh, well, thank you, Mike.
Sure.
And yes, actually, Michael, I was familiar with your work before I knew what I was familiar with because I had been reading The Druid Stares Back
Have
for
you
some
really?
time. Yes, but I don't remember where. I have no recollection of how I found it, but I had been reading it for some time. I mean,
Huh.
by some time, I mean maybe 2 months or so
Yeah.
before I talked to Mike and
Okay.
made the connection. So another kind of providential um, detail
That's
along the
very
way.
That's wild.
Um, but but yeah, no, I mean, my sort of background is quite conventional in a very at least superficially privileged sense. I mean, I started college. I went to Columbia in New York, and I did my undergraduate there, and then stayed on for a master's. Both times there's a funny department at Columbia um, that became what is it? It's Middle East Studies, African Studies, and Southeast Asian Studies. It's a department that has come under attack lately, in particular at Columbia for being a uh, ostensible hotbed of anti-Semitism. But at the time, I was attracted to it because it was sort of Edward Said was kind of the spiritual father of the program.
okay.
And when I got there, I think I grew up in a very um, you know very upper middle class liberal family, very connected to Democratic Party politics. A family where you know a, sort of I think I said this to Guido at some point, sort of peripheral to power, not where not
I haven't heard you use that. That's great. Yeah.
oh yeah. Well, it was sort of like we knew people who held power, or at least had the appearance of wielding power. The congressman from Massachusetts, or the senator would come to dinner occasionally.
Wow.
But neither of my parents, you know themselves were in positions of power. But it was a very kind of establishment liberal family and background. So when I got to Columbia, the Middle East Studies, Southeast Asian African Studies department, uh, was by far the most, I mean, to use the term that is, the term everyone uses, the most radical thing I had ever encountered before. Because, we didn't learn anything about colonialism or, you know, um, anything about the West, when I was growing up. So that seemed like this is the the story that had been hidden from me. I suppose it would be someone who something analogous might be you grow up in a very capitalist, whether or not one thinks that's the best term, but a very capitalist, family or milieu. You discover Marx, and you think Marx is, the diametrical opposite, and the antidote.
Yeah, he must be
That
right. Yeah.
he must be right, because I've never read anything like him before, and he seems in total opposition to everything I
Yeah.
had known
And I
before. So I think
suspect he's been hidden from me, even though he
This
hasn't
fits
really
in
Exactly.
been. Yeah.
perfectly with my Oedipal conflict.
yes, yes. It's no. I think exactly. I think
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There's definitely something of the Oedipal there, and I think that's true too. That, I mean, I think about this a lot now, about the hidden, that if you haven't, if you came from a background like mine, Edward Said seemed hidden. Marx
Yeah,
might have
sure.
seemed hidden, even though of course they're not hidden at all.
Yeah.
They're just they're also quite establishment,
They're
quite
running the
normative.
table. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so so I think that kind of defined the next sort of decade for me, is that sort of intellectual academic environment of a sort of a mix of post-colonialism, which I now sort of realize is such an obscene, absurd term, but post-colonialism, anti-imperialism, post-colonial subaltern studies, critical theory, sort of postmodernism, but in a sort of a no one really defining what that meant. That was sort of the limit of politics, of critical
Yeah.
thinking, of all of it, and it's sort of a church. I suppose,
Oh
like
yeah.
all churches, it does some good service, apart
Well
from the
said. Well said.
ideology. And but yeah, so that was sort of, that's what I went
Yeah.
into. I sort of entered that church, and then I did another master's at
Mhm.
Oxford in anthropology, and then I went to Berkeley to start a PhD in cultural anthropology, which was sort of, ideologically speaking, a continuation of what I had begun to get at Columbia.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I don't know how familiar you are with like anthropology departments, but anthropology as a whole, at least in the US, at the sort of more ostensibly elite institutions, has become, since the 70s, 80s, has become, another kind of, Foucault institution.
Sure. Sure.
Not
Oh
all
yeah.
of it, of course, but a lot of it. And Berkeley was sort of the real hub of that, because Foucault was at Berkeley. He was friends with some of the I mean, I don't know if they actually were close friends, but some of the people in the Berkeley anthropology department who were very senior when I got there, but they had known Foucault and been involved with him. And so, Berkeley was kind of where, at least for anthropology, where you would want to be if you
Yeah.
identified, using my words, carefully, as a kind of a post-colonial, anti-imperial, critical theorist type person.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and, but yeah, so that was, I think the process of the PhD, and please cut me off at any point.
No, you're getting, yeah, and again, because I think it's relevant, because you're saying like all of a sudden you started waking up to something. And again, I'm
Yeah.
not saying that I know that, like, whoa, that we have a brand name that you're waking up to. This is a story that Michael and I are kind of learning too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sort of ashamed in retrospect that I'm not sort of ashamed. I am ashamed. I think it happened when it was supposed to happen, but at the same time, I suppose one always wishes that one had understood certain things earlier, even if you accept that you understood them when you were kind of ready for it. But looking back, I think a lot of my real unhappiness within the PhD, in retrospect, was sort of, I think, kind of thinking within a structure of thought that deep down I knew something was badly wrong there, but not being able to be awake to that fact, and therefore
Mhm.
sort of tying oneself in knots to try to fit within that structure, even though I think in reality it was quite poisonous, but you just keep
Yeah.
eating the poison because you think it's
It's the
the
only thing you
remedy.
know, right? The
Yeah,
only thing you
it's the only thing you know. Yeah. but so no, really, it really wasn't until the, I'd become kind of, I, I had become less and less sort of engaged with, the discipline as I went along and with academia, but I still was sort of going along with it. And it wasn't until it wasn't until the very last year that it kind of broke apart. And uh, and I think it was a mix of a couple things. One was, I mean, to be very honest, I think one was the job market and realizing,
What job market?
yeah, what job market? Yeah, what
Yeah.
job market? And even
For a,
within the
for a white
jobs,
cisgender guy too, right? Oh, you're fucked.
oh, I was completely screwed. So I mean, I applied to, like other friends of mine too, in the same sort of boat. I think I applied to like 40 or 50 things and didn't get anything. Um, and I I think getting kind of feeling kind of kicked out, exiled, even though of course everyone, say, oh, you keep trying, whatever. I think that was probably necessary. I think if I had been offered some nice position, um, maybe I would have kept going for another
Yeah.
5 years, 10 years. So I thank God for that. I think another part was, I said this to Guido actually, and I think well, come back later, but I think Gaza was a big part.
Okay.
And so, insofar as I think it sort of was the final disabusement of, well, one, how should I say this? It was this. I knew enough about the Middle East because that was my background to see how egregious the lies were, even on many of the kind of platforms that were seen as being more progressive or leftist or whatever. I had enough knowledge about that area to know, okay, these are all lies. And I think that, in a way that probably happened to a lot of people during COVID, but didn't happen to me at the time, pushed me to start, looking around at other things to say, well, okay, if they're lying this much about this, what else could be, lied about? And increasingly realize, oh, everything is being is being lied
Yeah,
about.
everything, every single
Everything,
thing. Yeah.
every single
It
thing
is
is being lied.
shocking to have to answer the question that way, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's literally everything's being lied about.
everything. And it's sort of, it's a kind of a, I don't know, the Matrushka dolls or whatever. It's
Yeah.
just, you open one up, another set of lies,
Yeah.
another,
Yeah.
another.
Well, there's a lie at the same time. There's a massaging of the story in a different direction that could have been revelatory.
Yeah,
There's an overt suppression through freedom of speech, but it's just like a fireworks display of like how, what we're seeing now. Yeah, continue. It's wild.
no, it is wild, and it's particularly wild, I think, because well, not particularly, but when you're around, when you're in an institution that not only prides itself but identifies itself with intelligence and knowledge,
Yeah.
and being the sort of the deepest thinkers of the of the flock, it's you know I think it's no less jarring if, like,
Right.
if I hadn't been, I don't know, if you weren't in academia, if you hadn't gone through all these fancy sounding institutions, it would still be just as jarring. But there's an extra kind of flavor to the recognition that not only are all these things being lied about, but I've been in it, the so-called smart. I've been in the same room with the smartest people, you know, in the world on paper for 15 years, and almost none of them are aware of the fact that they're being lied to about almost everything, and repeating, convincingly repeating
Mhm.
those lies. So that was a big one. And then I think, there were some things
And
in
not
my,
because like it's a brand name, but a good
no,
place again is like the Guido connection, like how you
yeah,
discovered him or something. It's a great way.
right,
Continue. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so, and then I think the other parts were, things in my personal life.
Yeah.
I think realizing, I mean, I don't, need to go into details, but just, I think realizing that in the same way, realizing that sort of in terms of specific issues or topics or events or historical details that you've been lied to, also realizing that, oh, maybe part of the reason why I've been so miserable so often for so long is because there's something profoundly sick in the, you know, in the water of the pond that I've been swimming in all of it, you know, sick in all aspects of it, you know, from the fact of, you know, this sort of, you know, kind of it very
And again, you were
quickly.
physically sick. You weren't thriving. Your life, you would never say
No,
you were at maximum
No, I
vitality.
would.
You know.
Well,
yeah,
let me jump in
Yeah,
here.
please, please.
So, what you're describing, Philip, is you're in these departments that are overrun by the people that Harold Bloom called the schools of resentment,
mm,
right? You're in this environment where people aren't happy unless they're miserable,
yes,
right?
Wow, wow.
And I
yes,
that's and humanities was like that for me too in where the places I was that and and the joy of academic discovery and interacting with ideas and other people gets sucked out of that environment
yeah,
where people, and those were the people, and I've said it a million times, who were the first ones to cave for the propaganda
yeah, yeah,
during COVID and so forth, because they had been living off propaganda for their entire lives.
yeah,
But they thought
yeah,
they weren't. That's the brilliant part about it. But
yeah.
I can't be. I have a PhD. Okay. What
Yes,
ministry are
exactly.
you
I
in?
can't be. Yes,
Mhm.
and I think, you know, to their, you know, to be fair to them, I think, and because I know this too, that, you know, the reason I went into academia was because I, you know, at the beginning, having, you know, some of the, I mean, now I realize that so much of why I was drawn into academia was, I think I said this to Mike on the phone at some point, that, you know, I'm pretty certain if I had been born 100, 200 years ago, I would have gone to the seminary because that's what I wanted. You know, I wanted a sort of you know, a deep, visceral, mystical relationship to to books, to reading, to texts.
Yeah.
And the first time you have those experiences, it's so sweet. It's sort of it's a kind of a wine you've never tasted before,
Yeah.
and that experience is so sort of profound and intoxicating, and not in a, I don't mean intoxicating in a bad way. I mean truly kind of you know, revitalizing. And then, you know, you're sort of chasing the re-experience of that, of those first experiences where you first sort of felt that something was turning on in your mind, that you were thinking
Yep.
in a different way. And but you just keep, you know, I think so few people kind of find that joy, that kind of intellectual, you know, also mystical sort of joy that they first, you know, found.
Right.
um and I think likewise for politics too in academia, that, you know, you read Edward Said for the first time, you read Foucault for the first time, and it's not even so much about what they're saying, it's that something is being kind of activated in you where you're like, oh, a different world is possible, a different way of thinking is possible that could be transformational, that could, you know, address all these evils that are true evils. But, you know, it never doesn't seem to ever go anywhere.
Yeah, well, in the English department, which I have a lot of experience, what you would have is you have, for me, I wanted to follow the doctorate because I loved literature so much,
Yeah,
because it was a kind of mysticism. It can be, right? It opens up the world or the universe to you, right? And you want to translate that to students, right? You want to deepen that experience because what you're describing is like it's like getting another hit. I mean, whoa, that felt good. I need another hit,
yeah, right,
right? Keep
yeah,
it going. I'm
yeah,
addicted. And then you get into the English department, and maybe it doesn't happen. Well, I think now it happens more often. When I was an undergrad, you still had professors who would enjoy teaching you about the glories of literature. But as I got older and went to graduate school and became a professor, you're like, oh man, they all hate it. They all hate their own discipline.
yes, yeah,
They hate literature. They're all trying to tell you that it's a ripoff, and then they want to know why nobody wants to enroll as a major.
yeah, yeah,
I can't figure out why we don't have any majors. I can.
yeah,
Because you hate it. because you
Yeah.
teach them to hate it.
Yeah. No, I think that's, I mean, no, I think that must be, that is totally true. And
They're
maybe,
all
you know,
dead
anthropo
white men, right? Dead white men.
yes.
Yep.
Yeah. 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 And, you know, even, you know, it's a strange argument now thinking about it, if, you know, if, you don't have to just read the people. It, it's not only important to read the people who you think are right. Um, even, you know, just even to give, you know, deference to certain kinds of arguments. You know,
Yep.
it's we were lucky in my cohort that we sort of were the last cohort of students before the sort of the general revolt. I mean, the revolt had already been happening in anthropology. I mean, they had kicked a lot of people out of the canon, but I think after us, it got really bad. Um, and um, and you know, I think anthropology has one benefit that, you know, English doesn't, which it still has, which I think is the, you know, the fieldwork experience,
Mhm.
you know, which is kind of a joke and a con, because no one, they don't, at least at Berkeley, they don't teach you how to do field work. No one tells you what it is. It's just you go somewhere and you do your best. But that itself, it's still kind of a, you know, it's still a wonderful thing. I mean, people go off everywhere. You know, I went to Istanbul for 2.5 years. Some people went to Siberia. Some people went to, um, my my wife is also an anthropologist. She went to Crimea. People go, you know, all over the place, and that's, you know, that's kind of, I think, kind of one of the nice things anthropology still has, is you get to leave. You get to get out of the
Study
academy.
abroad. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, study abroad, and you don't have to deal with academics. You know, you
Mhm.
go off and you get 2 years where you get to, you know, just talk to people who aren't other, you know, academics, which is nice. But I think too, I mean, people hate anthropology as well, because, you know, there's certainly the argument, which is undeniable, that, you know, at least to some extent, the origins of anthropology are in, you know, the British Empire's, particular form of divide and rule, and sort of developing the, you know, quite useful, um, you know, discipline of arraying quote unquote cultural facts about, you know, this or that tribe or society, and using them as a weapon. And that's very functional. It still is very functional. So that's undeniable that anthropology, you know, has been part of that. But yeah, people hate. I mean, anthropologists, many of them hate, or, you know, they have a very fraught relationship with the idea of anthropology. Um, and, you know, to the extent that it's always, and I'm sure this is true in other disciplines as well, the only reason to do anthropology is to think it otherwise, in that kind of that zeitgeisty term,
Mhm.
that it's
Mhm.
always, you know, the reason to do anthropology is to rethink anthropology, but it's just an interminable sort of loop of critique eating its own
Yeah.
tail, in
Uh-huh.
the, you know, ever vanishing promise of a different kind of anthropology. And it's just, you know, beating the dead horse,
Yeah.
you know, is much, you know, eating every last scrap off the bone, to try to keep going, in the idea that, you know, the corpse of the horse is going to get back up and suddenly be a
Yeah.
unicorn or something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
It's what Derrida calls the non-arrival of the Messiah, right?
mm,
It's always
Interesting.
coming. It's
Yeah.
always coming, but then you think, okay, actually I don't really want the Messiah to come.
Uh-huh.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. And they'd kill him if he arrived,
That's
at least
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
academic departments. They'd
Oh,
be,
they would. Yeah.
yeah, they would.
They would for sure. Oh yeah,
Um,
oh yeah, I don't even go there. But
no,
what a
um,
story. But I mean,
but yeah,
it's interesting to hear it from an anthropologist,
yeah,
you know, that's
Yeah. And
it's
again, you're
so
saying again some favorable things. It's not, you're not falling in or studiously trying to avoid being seen as a progressive or a red trad or something. You have some fondness for it, and again,
I
you
do.
recognize the British system of anthropology. Certainly it had some imperialist tendencies, but then the reaction could have been worse than the disease and so forth, very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Well, and it's, you know, I have great, you know, I feel this very strongly, that, you know, some of the best, many of the people we need most are the ones who go into academia, and they're seduced therein, and they're taken out of commission.
Wow. Yeah.
And like, we need them, because
You're
there are,
neutralized. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I went into it, I'm not saying that I'm one of the best of them, but I went into it because, well, one, I had this, deep, sincere, desire to commune with texts, and I, you know, I didn't want people getting blown up anymore. I didn't want,
Seems reasonable.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't want, America, or now I would say, the kind of the elite power structure going around raping, killing, stealing, all the rest of it. And I felt that very deeply. Um, and so you have a lot of people, I think, who go into academia, and I think particularly in anthropology, because it's become such a political discipline, people in it thinking they're doing political work. You have people who are very idealistic in the right direction, who really want to think and read, and you take those people, you put them into this system, and yeah, you kind of you take them out of commission. they're
Yeah.
they're not going to be any threat whatsoever,
Mm-hmm.
because they're going to be in there for the rest of their lives, most of them. And if don't stay in there for the rest of their lives, they'll be broken by it,
Right.
and they'll get out and they'll be bitter and they'll be
Well,
disempowered and whatever.
and I think what
So
happens
true. So
is
true.
is the process of graduate school and then the tenure process. Um, it destroys the good ones. So
Yeah,
because they won't, you don't rock the boat. I mean, you're not going to be an independent thinker in that kind of milieu because you don't want to draw attention to yourself and be sequestered. It's almost like I was working with my bees today. When a mouse goes into a beehive, the bees will kill it, but they can't move it out. So they'll cover it up with wax just to get the sting. So that's kind of what happens
wow,
with people like me going to academia is that they're going to try to kill you, right?
yeah,
Because my problem is I was too old when I went, and so I already had formed opinions, and I'm like, okay, no, you're not
mm,
gonna, no, I don't play that. I'm not
yeah,
trying to get the approval of my daddy. Okay, you're gonna be my surrogate father. It's not gonna
yeah,
happen with me,
right,
which was career suicide in a certain way. But you
yeah,
see that in academia is everybody acts like they're such a radical, but nobody's going to say anything that goes against the herd, right? If they
no,
do, they get destroyed. I even when my college, Mary Grove College, rest in peace, was closing, was abruptly closed because of mismanagement by the administration.
mm,
I knew full professors with 45 years who were afraid to speak out.
mm,
I'm saying, and I kept saying to them, "What are you afraid for? What can they do? They just took your job away.
yeah,
What more can they do? You're not, it's not like you're going to try to get a job someplace else. You're at retirement, you're 70, right? But they were so conditioned to be
yeah,
afraid and to kowtow that they could talk a good, brave game in the faculty meeting about helping the underprivileged or whatever. But when I raised the question, I said, really? Does anybody else feel guilty about saddling all these kids with enormous debt and marginal skills when they graduate? Anybody else
yeah,
feel bad about it? No, no one would say anything. And then I would be walking back to my office, and a couple of professors would sidle up to me. Oh, Michael, I'm so glad you said that. I said, why am I the only one saying anything? Right?
yeah,
But that's the culture.
yeah.
It's a culture of conformity.
I wonder if I know for me, I mean, this is because this is directly going into what you're saying. Um, so a bit of background, one of the areas of anthropology that I was very interested in was both the anthropology of religion, as it's called, but also the anthropology of secularism. And there's a big movement that sort of got going in the 90s, in particular with a now quite senior, very widely known and well-regarded anthropologist named Talal Asad. He wrote this book. He wrote Genealogies of Religion in the 90s,
Yep.
which was
Yep.
a big kind of
Yep. Very
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and so I had always sort of been, and this was long before I had any, you know, I got baptized this April, and I think I kind of inwardly converted in, late 2023. But so I was interested in this long before any of that. I always sort of had a kind of an instinctual aversion to secularism, just for the hypocrisy's sake. Just because it seemed, hypocritical what
And share
even the
what you
lighter.
kind of picked up from Assad, Talal Assad. What was that? That opened,
Yeah.
At least something of a door.
Yeah. And I will come back to what you were saying, Michael, because
Yeah.
what you were saying about professors not being brave is relevant. But I think what I picked up from Assad was that, well, one, in the broadest sense, that there is something about how religion is conceived in, pick your generic term, the West, modernity, capitalism, whatever. There's something about how religion is both conceived but also constructed, how religion as a category is imagined, that is, integral to how power operates today. And I think that basic insight, which is not Talal Assad's alone, but he was sort of the one, I think, to really kind of push that into anthropology, to have people think that, okay, maybe we don't need to just study what we already think to be religion. We need to think about how the very idea of religion gets formed, and how that idea is, how it filters through our institutions, how it's weaponized in different ways, how it's used to construct different ideas of. I mean, I'm going to be, very non-academic. Construct ideas of good and bad, right and wrong, and so that was very persuasive to me. As was, I think, since I was very interested, especially earlier on, in Islam, how Islam as a religion, presented, at least in a lot of popular culture, as the other to Christianity, and how that othering, um, for very obvious reasons, linked up so much to the wars on Iraq, Afghanistan,
Oh, it could
everything
serve
else.
the interests of power. Yeah, political
Yes,
Islam. Yeah,
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 right.
yeah.
So I think that's what really kind of brought me to it. And then, this field of secular studies, anthropology of secularism, it broadened out a lot. And a lot of it was sort of, and here's the strange thing, a lot of it was defending and uh, trying to sort of speak for the quote unquote religious in their defense. And to, like, so my first advisor, who sadly died 2 years into the program when I was there, a wonderful woman named Sabah Mahmood, extremely smart. I mean, I
Our
didn't know her that
previous
long.
guest, David Cayley, just for our fans, has
Ah,
interviewed both of those.
oh, really?
Yep, on his CBC. You could just go to his
Oh,
podcasts.
oh,
I know
cool.
at least Assad, and I believe Mahmoud
Yeah.
too. Yeah, Mahmoud.
Yeah, no, I mean, she was always very kind to me. One of the, sometimes you're in someone's presence and you can feel their kind of
Yeah,
intellect
yeah.
crackling, and I felt that with her. But she wrote a book about Muslim women in Egypt, and sort of attacking certain dominant conceptions of freedom and agency in, academic philosophy. To sort of argue that, okay, these sort of pious women in Egypt, who are, many of them from, lower class backgrounds, how, they're not just submitting to some form of authority that's constraining them. They are constructing, themselves in an active way, and they also are exerting a kind of agency and freedom in what appears to sort of, Western philosophers or Western media as, patriarchal submission or whatever. And there was a lot of sort of Aristotelian stuff in there of, um, uh, older ideas of freedom, also in Christianity. It's a great book. the strange thing is, and I didn't realize this until later, that basically all of the, I don't know exactly what Saba Mahmoud's sort of faith was, but generally speaking, all the anthropologists of religion and secularism are, I won't say let's not say secular, they're non-believers. I think Talal Asad, from what I've heard, has sort of become maybe somewhat more religious, whatever that means later in life. But there's no, it's this sort of defense of the religious, or an attempt to sort of express to us, an ostensibly secular point of view, that the religious is something other than what the secular sees it as. But all the people who are doing this work are secular, or at the very least, that they're not pious people.
It's like sexologists who've never had sex.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
something like that. I mean, I remember being, I apologize if my advisor is listening to this. I don't mean this in any negative way, but my primary advisor, at the very end of the program, actually, it was after I had left, I told him that I had sort of converted to Christianity, and I had asked him a question I had never asked him before. That was, I don't know why I never asked him this. I had known him for 8 years at that point. Did he have any sort of belief in God? And he said, no, no. It sort of sounded like, well, I've kind of thought about it, or I've
It's really
tried, but
great.
no. And that's what he's worked on his
Yeah.
whole life, is
Yeah.
sort of the anthropology of religion.
Mhm.
And I was, reminded, there's a line, I don't remember how the line goes, but in the, I think it's in Kolakowski.
Okay.
I think he was a Polish, maybe, sort of philosopher, somewhere sort of Eastern Europe. He wrote a big book on Marxism, but he was
Okay.
Catholic. And he has some line in some essay where he says, basically it's just sort of saying, is it possible for intellectuals, academics who do not have faith, to be writing in defense of faith? I mean, how does that work?
Mhm.
And but it's very prevalent. I don't know any. I should not. I take that back. I know 2 people who do anthropology of religion who are sort of, pious people. I know they're more than that, but it's a rarity.
But I could make a case for it in a sense that, and this would get into a little bit of, and again, Steiner's kind of a welcome friend in this conversation because
Yeah.
Philip is starting a little bit of a dive, Michael, and but if we mention this notion, just thinking
Becoming a
out
tumble.
loud, yeah. But if you even think of like Steiner or Barfield's view of the evolution of consciousness, that this period that Owen Barfield would call alienation, or Cartesian, like the fundamental, at least these people, you can almost see them working according to kind of an Elitchian plan or Charles Taylor type of plan, the worst being the corruption of the best. But they're those scholars like Assad, it seems to me, they were able to, by completely objectifying the thing called religion, of which they, even though we know this is ontologically fictitious, that Barfield said, that kind of Cartesian viewpoint, methodically fruitful, but ontologically fictitious. But these people have done a service because they have pointed out for scholars like yourself and Preparat, it seems to me, how the category of religion can be used, as a tool of total control, and Preparata's use of like devoutness as a tool of war. We have a guest, there's a theologian who has been on the program. His name is Bill Kavanaugh. You can look for that, Philip. But he told, the myth of religious violence, that the category of religion is really useful for this entity called the nation state, that claims to stand above it and all that stuff. But interesting stuff.
You're reminding me when I interviewed Margaret Barker a few years ago, and we were talking about this particular thing, especially about theologians who don't believe in God. She said, "Michael, it's quite like talking to someone, a French professor, who knows everything about French literature, French language, but isn't really sure that France exists."
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think again, I think it's a stage that God can use, but it is weird. But again, we could have a certain type of devoutness that would look at that, and a lot of this could be associated with a certain form of like rad trad or Thomistic thing. But like, that this is the biggest contradiction in the world. That somebody, well, no, a sexologist can still learn a lot
Yes.
about sex. But again, like pornography is a lie in the other direction. Again, it's like you can see people huffing and puffing, but they're missing the beauty, the singing of the senses, the intercommunion, and so forth. So, there's two truths, but it's, so they know quantitatively, and we can talk about this stuff. They can know quantitatively a lot about these things, but qualitatively, and it's kind of like, polarity, Coventry Patmore said, all these truths of the faith, when they discovered kind of magnetism, the notion that the North Pole is in the South Pole, but when we get totally filled with the objectivity, we lose all meaning, right? Then meaning's gone. A technical manual about how to use a vacuum cleaner could be so freaking accurate, but it's the farthest thing from poetry, and it's not going to convey quality or meaning, Yep.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Right. Yeah. No, I think that that's true because, clearly so many of these people have done, I think especially in the sort of the more pioneers of it, people like Assad or even, people of my advisor's generation. Um, but it is peculiar, and I think that there's a limit of how far it can go. And maybe that limit is the limit of the academic as such, which is also a category like religion. It's also a category that you can do different kinds of work with. And, maybe in a certain way, it doesn't matter if you believe or not. If you're writing about religion as an academic, there are going to be limits imposed. And, I think some people would say, well, those limits are themselves secular. So, is it possible to write about religion? Is it possible to write a critique of secularism, within academia? Because, you are almost by definition or sort of ineluctably partaking of the very sort of categories and structures of thought that you're saying you're trying to sort of push against or resist. So it's, so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you taught me your language, and my profit on is, and I know how to curse.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's a really interesting thing here too, and it's not to move the story, and totally forgive me, but because of Michael, and I work, in the institutional structure of the Catholic Church. But so, it's almost like the same thing we were talking about, and this became kind of a burning thing for me just like 10 seconds ago. It's just there could be something interesting to say right here, right now, with all three of us, that, so here you are, Philip, you became, you went from that world, there's some belief here. On this podcast, we're always talking about the rad trads who, what is the entrance point? Where Michael is right now. Mike, you could say, was studied in the tradition, so he can kind of, shape the tradition. That there's something of an initiation in a tradition. How are you? And then Michael's reaction. How are you looking at this as almost like a neophyte trying to start engaging with what's the term you're using? What do you share with us? Like, how are you looking at this whole kind of beast you're starting to wrestle with? Religion, Jesus Christ, the church, faith.
Well, I have this, feeling which just keeps intensifying that this isn't exactly answering the question, but
Sure, that's fine.
it isn't, kind of leading up to maybe an answer. I have this feeling that has grown stronger and stronger since, I first, inexplicably in a secular way of talking about it, inexplicably, found myself praying to Jesus. That we're at the end of something, or maybe it's already ended and we're at the beginning of the new thing. But that one, and there's so many different kind of terms from philosophy and intellectual history that one could use to sort of talk about these, or you could just say an epoch, an era, I don't know, if you were Foucauldian, you could say an episteme, a world. I don't know. I really feel like we're at the end of something, and something new is either struggling to be born or has been born and is sort of crying out and struggling to be heard, or I don't know. But because of that, because I feel very much that right now is sort of a liminal transitional phase, when I think about something like the church, how do I relate to the church? Well, I feel that my relationship with, with Jesus Christ is becoming stronger and more personal. I don't know exactly what to do with the church. And part of the reason I don't know what to do with the church is that is for this feeling. I feel like what the church means is going but necessarily to be very different by, maybe even by the time I sort of reach a, a, a deeper level of spiritual maturity or something. And that, when I kind of, look, even, look back to sort of things that are written or perspectives from 30, 40, 50 years ago, I don't know, am I looking at something contemporary or am I looking at something that's already kind of an artifact, even if people haven't recognized it's an artifact yet? I don't even know if I go to church is, is much of what is still happening kind of already fossilized. I don't mean the sort of the fundamental experience, but
These are real questions.
yeah. And so I don't, this is part of the, I don't know, this is part of the difficulty. And I think it goes back to someone like Steiner, like, is the fact that, I recently converted, feel, I feel more and more firm in my faith. And at the same time, now I'm spending a bunch of time reading someone like him. Is that peripheral? Is that marginal? Is that weird? Or is that something that actually is sort of in the unseen process of moving to the center? And I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes sense. No, and I think you're right about living through an apocalypse, through a
Mm,
breakdown, right? I mean, I think that's part of, the structure. I mean, I've been saying this for at least 5 years, maybe more, that academia, the institutional church, politics, it's all falling apart. It's been decayed for a long time, but now we can no longer deny, or at least some of us can no longer deny it, and it's more and more apparent. And so, what does that mean then, right? So just if we're going to use the idea of the church, it was one of my favorite things because I talk to people of all kinds of faith traditions, I'm just sticking within Christianity, and you ask them, well, what do you mean by the church? And it becomes a kind of glittering generality because what it is, that term becomes whatever I project onto it. And I really, when I start to try to unpack it, that's why people don't want to do that, and they get reactive because once you start to try to unpack it, you realize you don't have a definition because I ran into, remember Steve Skocek, is there whatever, Skopek, remember that guy?
oh, he was the
I
guy who wrote the fake article that got accepted. Is that him?
No, no, no. He
Oh,
was the guy who
That's who I was
started
thinking.
1 Peter 5.
ah,
Oh, okay, yeah. They were
But
kind of a
then he then
ragtag
he
group.
now
Yeah.
he's an atheist.
Uh-huh.
And I had an interaction with him maybe a year and a half ago or two on
But that's not shocking, right?
Well,
You
no,
know,
no, but the thing is,
that form
the
of
guy's
faith
going
just,
through
yeah, yeah,
an existential crisis because of it.
yeah.
But I said, well, what's the problem? What's the church? And he,
What's your problem?
for him, the church means the bozos running the joint, right?
hmm,
Um, and I said, well, is that really what the church is? And he goes, how can it not be? That's what and and I think when you start to thank you, deconstruction. When you start to deconstruct that term, you know, this is where I actually love Derrida in his later years, in his religious turn, if you want to call it that, his apophatic turn, um, because then you realize, what's his How to Avoid Speaking, a great essay by him, right? So we get to this point of trying to unpack what that word means, and we realize we can no longer speak.
hmm,
And those who do speak probably, it's only an indicator. So I'm not ripping on you, Philip, for saying the church, but when you say it, it's not really a definition, it's an indicator, right? If
yeah.
that makes any sense. right? And that's what Mike knows. I hate definitions because definitions kill the livingness of the word. So
But there's a nice image we could use, I think. And again, and I agree with you when we're talking about the church. Something, and I don't even need to to tie it to the Roman Curia exactly. But
that's
again,
okay.
for Illich, this notion of the church as the skeletal structure, which is inherently conservative, it's bureaucratic, and we can give it even the mystery there. It can blend into the problems in the Anglican Church right now. And then the church as she, which is, like the human body, does it end with the hair on my skin? These ideas of liminal spaces, it kind of is out there, like front porches and so forth. But and that's where I think we can. I guess I just wanted to put 2 cents in there that we're going to need poetic images because the person we talked about last week, this Eugen Rosenstock Hussey, some of this problem that maybe Derrida was playing with is the difference between words and names. And we need to name things again. We need sacrificial acts that are taken seriously, but so we can come up with some names. But which isn't the same thing as forming a new institution like a 401(c)(3). But interesting, very interesting. And so you're kind of looking at it like as of today, Philip. You know, your relation vis-a-vis the skeletal structure of some form or another.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think it's well, I mean, I, I don't know with the church. I mean, with academia, it seems like it's a question of is it a is it a sort of a bloodless skeletal structure that needs to be knocked down and something very different needs to be constructed, um, or like for the disciplines, for instance. I mean, now we kind of think about these disciplines as timeless forms, capital F, but of course, they've been around, many of them just for a century or century and a half. Um, do we need, it's not to repudiate anthropology, but do we need anthropology, or do we need to come up with new disciplines or new conceptions that are not disciplinary, different sort of ideas about what a sort of a scholarly intellectual unity might look like. Do we need anthropology, sociology, politics, economics, etc., to all be separate? Do we need very different sort of categories for getting at sort of what we hope to get at some point, with those ideas, disciplines? And I don't, I don't know yet. And I think with the church too, and sorry, this is a bit, rambling, but I think there's a particular problem for someone like me who is a convert, later in life, who wasn't raised Catholic or Anglican or some Protestant and then lapsed and then went back, but really, came into it totally for the first time. Um, that question of a church is also a practical question that's imposed not just by myself, but primarily by other people, including other Christians. What church are you going to? What are you going to choose?
Mhm.
Are you going to be this? Are you going to be that? And that's a question that both sort of, more secular people, will ask just out of curiosity and, interest, and also, more of a deeper theological, uh, question that, would be asked by, um, people within the church, variously defined. And I think this is somewhat similar with anthropology or academia. There's a reticence within me to feel like I have to choose a church or choose to sort of identify with, say, okay, I'm going to become a member of this or a member of that. This is going to now be appended to my
Yeah.
identity in the same way that, many people, have to, say, well, I'm an anthropologist, I'm a sociologist, I'm an academic, um, I'm a
Right.
Catholic. And I think that my sort of, I wouldn't say frustration, but sort of like uncertainty about this is maybe a lot of it maybe just has to do with me but I think some of it has to do again with the times, of, you know, I know, I the only thing I know with sort of certainty regarding Christianity is that I want to and have to believe in Jesus Christ and the Gospels, and have faith in those terms. I don't know with the same certainty that I don't have the same sort of visceral certainty about being an Anglican or being a Catholic or being an anthropologist or being an academic. I don't know if that kind of
Well,
makes
yeah, no,
sense, but
Go ahead.
because those
yeah,
things become are it's so easy for all those identities to become cosplay.
yeah,
You know,
right,
Agreed. Agreed.
that's the challenge, right? Oh, we're gonna start acting. I'm gonna start acting the part. It's like
yeah,
in
right, yeah,
Pulp Fiction, right? Let's get into character, right?
yeah,
When you're going to church, let's get into character.
And the best
yeah,
way, I could phrase the pro to it, because I agree, Michael, I agree with that, would be, and I'm going, Rosenstock, people know that it's kind of big for me right now, but what's cool about him too is he could echo David Hume. But like, just here at this moment, having spoken to you before, Philip, I would make a case, and it's not a specific case, that like somebody at this juncture in history where we've agreed we don't know if these forms are holding the water anymore, or the wine, but that we're an embodied faith, we're a historical faith, that dies and rises over times. But there could be a case made that you'd want to become a decent practitioner of some of the practices for a while, right?
yes,
That your
yes, yeah,
body is, and again, what you choose exactly, because Michael, nobody's more harsh, but I hope in a loving way, on a kind of a rad trad, just ideological practice, which we might just say is fossilized, which is still a practice, but it's almost like, building the canals, but never even look for the water. You know, I'm always telling people my years at the monastery, that, yeah, it's a very conservative Trappist monastery. But the way they talk about it was from the more human, right? They have to learn how to get
yeah,
along with people in close proximity who could possibly annoy the crap out of them. Out in the world, we run from each other, right? We all self-select for people who are just like us. That's why Jesus said, I think in the readings, recently, leave father and mother behind. That we got to practice this human game in with other people. So there's disciplines of doing that. The
yes,
constant practice of forgiveness and things like that. So I would say, that somebody could, a lot of people are at that juncture, and then they put together their own little kind of plan, that they're going to do this. And, I don't really have a clear answer after that. That's why I would say you kind of choose a tradition probably, because that middle road is too funny. Our bishop,
yeah,
a very kind of traditional guy, a lot of these young conservatives, the people who are joining at the Easter Vigil of the church, and the numbers are up, about 60% are not practicing, 3 months
mm,
later, because it was all in their head for conservative reasons.
right, right,
Yeah.
And again, they did the piety, but it was still like, it was a
cosplay,
bad sense of that religion, like
yeah,
cast out the libtards from our country, this type of
right,
stuff, right?
right,
And it wasn't learning how to surf. It was
yeah,
worshiping at a surfboard and calling it surfing. Or again, the sexologist who just never tried to have an experience.
Ideology.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
ideology.
yeah. No, and I've been, I've been going. I mean, I say these things, and at the same time, I've been going once or twice a week to church,
Yeah.
every week for, almost 2 years now. So
Wow.
it's very. I think, I think the first time I took communion, it was at a Presbyterian church was the first church I went to in Berkeley, and I only, they did. I don't quite understand what the theology or the tradition is, but they do communion, kind of intermittently. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I never was
And it's
sure sort
grape
of what.
juice, right? It's grape juice, or is it wine?
It might have been grape juice,
Oh,
actually.
all right.
Yes, I think it
I
might
don't
have
mean to
been.
be
Yeah.
hostile with that. I just
No,
think it's
no,
grape juice. Yep, yep.
it might have been. I mean, it was also Berkeley, so it was
Okay,
probably
yeah.
organic. I'm sure it was
Yeah, yeah,
organic.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
Get
It
but
these
was
say, ladies from
locally
the
sourced.
yes, but the first time I know I wasn't supposed. I mean, I know technically I wasn't supposed to, but the first time I did that, that was something happened to me.
Wow.
Um, uh, and you know, and so I know, for instance, like whatever church I go to, it has to be a church that actually does at least that sacrament, because you know, that has always felt very
Mm-hmm.
deeply important. So I want, you know, I mean, I feel very much that I need to practice, and I want to practice, and I think what sort of I recoil from is sort of like, you know, what both of you were saying before, is having to having to put on any yeah, how to having to put on a certain outfit,
Yeah.
or rather, um all I want, I want to practice. I don't want to,
Perform.
I yeah,
Yeah.
and
Right.
even identify,
Mm-hmm.
even sort of uh yeah,
What do
I
you say to
certainly,
that,
yeah.
Michael? Yeah. Because that's a very
You
human
what?
thing. Michael, I'm curious what you would say to that, you know?
No, I
I'm
get
trying to
you.
think
I get.
Chesterton
Well,
wrote about
what I'm
that. Yeah.
thinking actually, what's occurring to me, you know, well, like what I said about definitions, because there's a, we put the pressure on us to conform to an image of something. Sometimes it's there, you know. I think
Yeah.
you know, it's present there, and I think everybody has to contend with it. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, you know, over 100 years ago, Rudolf Steiner talking about um, these things need to take on new forms.
Mm,
Not just, I mean, he was talking about Christianity, but he's also talking about politics and economics. And I think we're certainly um, kind of this pervasive ennui that's all over everything right now. There's a kind of, it feels exhausted. You know what I mean? I mean,
yeah,
the structures feel exhausted to me, like almost that they're zombie entities, like the church, or you know, and not just the Catholic, any church, you
I'm
know.
kind of writing down exhausted structures as a possible title
You
for
know,
this with Philip Mailman
there you go.
in one sense. Yeah.
But also academia. It's
Yeah.
exhausting. We're out of
yes,
gas, right? And it's stuck. Interestingly enough, as I wrote a few weeks ago on my Substack, with about the zombie liberal arts apocalypse, that uh, all you know, there just aren't the people around to fill those small liberal arts colleges anymore. There's just it's demographic winter,
yeah,
and it's probably a good thing that they all just, you know, go down, and it's unfortunate, but the good part is that this might finally break it so that new forms can arise. I don't know what the new forms
yeah.
will be, right? But I think new forms. I don't think it can't go on how it is, how it's been. I don't
Yeah.
think.
So there's one thing I wanted to ask actually, both, you know, with that about, you know, new forms, and um or potentially reincarnating, you know, an old form in a new body. Um, so the two things that yeah, so there are two things there that I want to ask. One is, so in anthropology, it's not just in anthropology, there are other disciplines too. There has been over the last decade, I'd say, a little, you could say more than that, but really, you know, it's kind of took on more steam over the last decade. Um, Something called the ontological turn. You maybe, yeah, you've probably heard of it. And, you know, it takes on different sort of dimensions.
Mm.
In anthropology, a lot of it, they don't always use this term ontological turn. Sometimes everything gets lumped in under that one classifier, even though people would say, well, that's not what I'm doing. But sort of an effort to I find or recognize existence in places where existence is denied or not thought about within, again, we could pick our term, the West, modernity, secularism, capitalism, and then we could, I guess, add late, post, whatever to any of it. So within anthropology, sometimes this has been people who, you know, went to work in, you know, with the shamans, you know, somewhere. and writing about different kinds of beings that are, recognized, talked about by, people in a tribe in the Amazon. Um, there's some people who have, kind of done it with. I mean, actually, yeah, I think Amazonia has sort of been the main sort of source of it. Some people went into Russia, Siberia, and then there's some stuff of people who have kind of done more speculative work about, ghosts and things like that. And some of the stuff is really interesting. Some of it I think is cosplay, is to use your word. Like, writing academic articles about, like, what if the water glass that got knocked over on my table was my dead cat, and then talking about how which is fine. I mean, that's
sure.
totally cool. But then using that as a way to say, oh, this is how we dismantle secularism by,
Right.
but there seems to be a kind of an unacknowledged craving for other forms of existence, and existence not just in the normal way it's been done in academia, even in the more sort of radical wings of, like, um, different kinds of existence in a metaphorical sense, these sort of as if, but actual kinds of existence. And, thinking about that, it made me realize that I mean, I've only been going to church for 2 years. I have not heard anyone once talk about angels
Right.
At church.
at church. Not, I mean, again, I never went to a Catholic. I haven't been to a Catholic church yet, even though
You wouldn't
I was
hear it too much, but you would hear it, but not a
yeah,
lot.
okay. But something about also, I remember this book, Bruno Latour had this book, We Had Never Been Modern, and he thought about, things existing. I mean, he wasn't, even though I know actually he was quite pious apparently, but that the world is peopled by many other kinds of beings
Right.
that we don't usually think about, even though he's not thinking in explicitly sort of spiritual terms. But so I see this in academia, this sort of desire for more kinds of existence. Obviously, I see it in Steiner, and so this is the first question about the a world full of gods, to use, I think that was the title of a book by David Bentley Hart, or all the world full of gods, or something. Yeah.
That's right.
Um,
All full of gods.
so does that seem, in the broadest sense, something that seems to either of you part of a revitalization of the forms, or a
Yes.
Welcome to the theme statement of the Regeneration
That's right.
podcast.
okay, yeah.
In one sense,
Well, yeah, I
yeah.
mean,
A return with a difference, we might cast it,
well,
right? The new Middle Ages, a higher paganism. Chesterton pointed to that, where you could be. I always say this: the return of the feminine. At one level, the divine feminine can be the devouring she-wolf, a Rapunzel who gets locked in a tower by her mother. And then, and that could be associated with a first shot at this stuff, a paganism. And then you have this kind of austere period, and that what might be happening in this kind of schema is the return to that with a difference, the nurturing mother, Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so themes like that are very much, part of this. And I'm overstating the fact that we have a brand, Philip, but yeah, I mean, Michael, that's the song he sings in really all of his books. You're looking up what, my friend?
No, I got a couple of things.
Cool.
So, well, I think what we're seeing right now, besides those old forms as ossified zombies as they are right now, but there's also, because of, I think, the findings of quantum physics and uh I think you're going to see this according to where the planets are right now, astrologically.
I would say 100%. Bring it in. You have to.
No, it's going to happen, because I've been pretty good about predicting this stuff so far. Is that I think, actually, not only quantum mechanics and stuff like that, but with as you were alluding to, Philip, the renewed interest in psychedelics and microdosing and all that kind of stuff. And when we talked to Jamie about using psychedelics in her Catholic psychotherapy practice, there's an awakening to this, and there's awakening to it because the Enlightenment hit a wall,
Yeah.
right? It did what it can do, and it can't do anymore,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And what the Enlightenment led to was Pfizer, right? And so, but I was going to point out to this is one of my very favorite books ever.
The Enlightenment led to Pfizer. Yeah.
The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by W.Y.
Huh.
Evans Wentz.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books, published.
I thought Philip was grabbing his copy or something right in his
Yeah.
car.
Oh no, I
Like,
wish.
whoa,
I
yeah.
wish.
It was published in, I think, 1910,
Hmm.
and it was Evans Wentz's
Yeah, masterpiece.
doctoral dissertation from Oxford University, which you'd never get away with doing this now. And he talks to vision, Irish bog trotters who've seen the fairies, and he interviews people. He does the cultural history, does the whole bit, right? But but the reason I'm pointing to that is because that was 100 years ago. In the meantime, you would not be able to pull that off
Yeah.
in doing a dissertation. But I think probably actually when I did mine on a pretty weird topic. You know, it was a bunch of mystics and people speaking to angels and gods and stuff.
Yeah.
And I hear from people, I'm not kidding, almost daily, who bump into my work and go, "Thank God, I thought I was the only crazy person out there, but you're crazy too, but you don't seem as crazy as I thought I was." So it's nice to meet you. But there's that. But then you mentioned my man Chesterton, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite quotes from Chesterton from his book Heretics.
Mhm.
If we ever get the English back onto the English land, they will become again a religious people. If all goes well, a superstitious people. The absence from modern life of both the higher and lower forms of faith is largely due to a divorce from nature and the trees and the clouds. If we have no more turnip ghosts, it is chiefly from the lack of turnips. What a great guy.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
that what he's talking about, what Evans Wentz was not dismissive about, and that's the thing that annoys me about academia in general, is the snooty attitude toward people of faith or who have these alternative experiences. Well,
Yes.
that's nice
Yeah.
that you think that, right? And they don't take them sincerely, right?
Yeah.
They act like they're Cartesian subjects looking at this thing over there that they're not involved with. But
Yeah.
quantum mechanics has destroyed that long since, and people haven't caught up with it yet, especially in academia. But I think we're on the cusp or the verge of really a kind of I wouldn't call it I would call it a renaissance or something, but some kind of new birth of which I think is I think, and I could be wrong, but it certainly seems to be looking at it astrologically that that's what we're going to head to, and we're just about there. I mean, it could. I mean, and I think part of I don't want to get too crazy. A part of what you see right now with all the guys I call the archons, they are so scrambling to try to maintain the old stupid enlightenment. I would call it communism married to capitalism model to keep people enslaved and divided, but it's fallen apart quickly.
I hope
It's
so.
really wild to watch, but I think it's really falling apart. And but the thing is, what comes next? And I think they're scrambling to be the guys who are in charge of what comes next. But I think it's too big.
Do you think it's falling apart, Philip? Because that's a fun way to bring in Preparata for a few minutes. And
Well,
then
no,
again,
that's
next time we'll have you both on. Because
but
Guido would
yeah.
say, I'm not saying, but he'll still, and it's hard for me to
Hmm.
believe, Michael, I'm temperamentally like with you, but Guido wouldn't say nothing, but that like this thing, even if it's getting, if it's
I
in the
know what he'd
corner a
say.
little bit and they're hitting it.
Mike,
Right.
they're always 10 steps
Yeah.
ahead of us,
Where
right?
are you, Philip? Where are you on this? It's a
Well,
fundamental
I
question.
think I'm ping-ponging back and forth between those two
Me
positions.
too. Me
That
too.
that sometimes I feel like, you know, well, fundamentally, I think, and also, I I've never said this before out loud, but as a Christian,
Uh-huh.
um,
Congratulations,
What?
ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We
I've
should have
never,
like
I've
a
never said that
fanfare.
Yeah,
before.
it's a public, yeah.
Ta-da!
Just, yeah. Just a little
Someone should show
emoji.
up with some
Yeah, there's just a
icons.
little emoji. Just boop, boop, boop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, not only do I have to, but I do believe that, there not only is there a limit to the powers of evil,
Right.
or whoever the representatives are, but that, you know, we the battle has already been won. I mean, the triumph has already been succeeded in a way. I don't
In a
mean
way,
in
yeah.
a way, I don't mean that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't pretend to understand that deep, most profound of theological questions, but
Mhm.
I know enough to know that there is my faith says that there is no way that, however conniving, devious these forces are, there is no way that they will fully succeed.
Agreed.
Which doesn't mean that, 99.9% of us might not be wiped out in some. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't mean that we could all become Gazans, and but so I have to believe that there is a that the story is not pre-written in the way that I see a lot of people seeing it as pre-written. I'm not saying
Yeah.
this is what Preparata thinks, but that these forces, these people are so powerful, they are so smart, they are so conniving, they will always be 10 steps ahead,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they are going to enslave us all. And that's where it ends, with them enslaving us all. Um, I can't believe that. At the same time, I also find it very compelling what Preparada sort of seems to suggest that. I'll give an example. I've seen him say this on this podcast before. Why are they? Why are they? Why is it the case that we got Biden and now Trump? Two elderly, seemingly both somewhat cognitively challenged, old, white dudes. I've
Right.
seen Preparata say, well, they could, the Anglo-American Empire, or whoever they are, they could choose anyone. They could put in some, extremely virile, young, attractive man. He could be mixed race. He could speak, he could be bilingual in English and Spanish, and he could be very sexy and very articulate, and make it, pull in the leftists and make it even many of the right wingers, make them find it difficult not to like him. Um, or they could put in some young, sexy woman, whoever,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Is
So
the
they've been trying,
fact
right?
is the fact that it's Biden and now Trump, is that a sign of decrepitude and weakness, or is it a sign of true deviousness?
Good way of
And
framing it.
I think it's a very powerful question. Likewise, um, right now, I mean, I follow some of the military stuff, with some degree of closeness. I'm not an expert, but I follow sort of, the kinds of technology the US has militarily, what's happening on the battlefield in Ukraine. And if you look just at all the sort of available details, the American empire is screwed.
Hmm.
Um, their technology, at least as far as we know, is not, at the very least, it's not keeping up with China is producing. The West, NATO, has no industrial capacity compared to
Oh
Russia.
yeah, they're fucked. Yeah,
Yeah. And
they're
so,
fucked.
the military itself, I listen to, former colonels and majors and, talk about this. The American military itself is very poorly trained. I mean, I don't know this for myself, but
Mhm.
listening to people who seemingly do, that they're not battle ready. Um, and so if you look at just of like the power that seems to be available to the West or to the Anglo-American Empire, whatever, on the surface, you would think that, yeah, they are screwed. Um, Now, the question I think is two things. One, is them being screwed part of the plan? And how would that work if it's the case? And then the next step too is, and I think this is what Preparada thinks, is it, are Putin and Xi Jinping also just part of the, are they also actors in the play?
Yeah.
Um, and that seems to me, I don't know.
Wow, this is cool. So I want to hear from Michael, but that will lead to
Yeah.
part 2 where we'll have you back
Yeah.
soon
No, yeah.
with
Well-
Guido. But Mike, you kind of put some closure, because Philip,
Well,
you're
I
going to be
think-
back soon.
I think, we had this conversation this morning because my wife, we were following that hearing with Bobby Kennedy the other day, which was what a joke. And he really handled those losers. But but then at the same time that President Trump was asked about the vaccine thing in Florida, and he said, "Well, I think we might not need to keep him." And my wife was like, "What does he mean?" And I said, "You know what? I know, I always want to be reactive when Donald Trump says something, but I've learned to not react because a lot of what he does is I think he gets his opponents off balance because usually a week or two later he does something that comes out of the left, you know, does what you thought he was going to do in the first place, but then he threw you off that you wouldn't think he was going to do it. So that's part of what I think. But I also think that I don't think Donald Trump is part of it. I think they want him dead.
Mm.
I really do. And because they tried,
I think the Occam's
bit.
razor for me is quite not easy, and I'm not saying I have it, but I think a lot of us who kind of size up other guys would think maybe not directly implicated in something horrible there, but has very, this Tim Dillon was, recently, maybe 4 weeks ago.
He's
I don't
funny,
listen
yeah.
to him all the time, but he's saying like when you have a donor, he's capturing the obvious. When you have a donor who gave you like $1 billion for your campaign, it's not like they say now have a good time. They're knocking on your
Right.
door the next day.
Right.
And that I believe he has friends, that would be very much implicated. But right now,
Well,
what's the latest one on that we've been,
I don't
led
know.
to believe that he was used by the CIA in some way regarding Epstein?
He was an FBI
I know.
informant. That's what
Yeah.
that's what they said
So
lately.
is this losing control of the narrative, or is it like an Orwellian?
I
Them
know,
letting us know that we know they know that they're lying to us and them having fun.
All I know
Which,
with Trump, I'm like, that old trick they tell you, guess how many jelly beans are in the jar.
yeah.
And the way to get it is to be the last person to guess and to find an average of all of the crazy, everybody's just average it out and it's always pretty close to what it is. That's what I think it is with, I'm always like, I don't want to say because I always not too early with this guy. But I do think, I said this years ago because I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2020, no, in 2016. And the way the economy was before COVID, I remember telling my wife, there's no way that guy's going to lose the election in 2020. Absolutely no way. Because the economy was in really great shape. And part of me thinks the Archons took down the economy with COVID and all that other stuff just to get him out of office. And I know that might sound crazy, but I don't think it is crazy because I think they would do that because they don't care what the collateral damage is. I don't know if you caught Naomi Wolf's speech to the European Parliament the other day, where she was just going from the Pfizer documents, when they released I don't know how many millions of pages of documents, and she was they knew that those things were attacking the reproductive organs.
Hmm.
And they did it anyway. And the U.S. government knew it, and they did it anyway. Right? So, I do know, put it this way, I do know the people we're up against, whoever they are really evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
really
and-
evil.
And
I'm not sure to what extent Donald Trump's part of it.
well, I don't know. I know I struggle with this question too. I think for me, my Occam's razor says, well, there is this, and this is not the kind of deepest level of the sort of the rabbit hole thinking, but
Sure.
I think it's totally plausible that among the elite, let's say, there are factions. And
I always use the example of the Boston Brahmins and the Texas Oilmen. different mob
Yes,
factions.
well,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
actually,
yeah,
but
yeah,
actually, you can
yeah.
even follow some of the money and
Right.
see these divisions,
Sure.
between the beneficiaries of the legacies of big oil and the old European banking families and whatever. And so it seems I don't know, one thing to me seems like there are factions. Donald Trump sort of represents one of those factions, and there's a war between, there's been a sort of war between the factions, and um, another one that I see a lot, which I wrestle with, and I'm just sort of putting this out there so we can talk about next time or something, Michael, because I totally, I very much appreciate and see and have thought at times myself, even if I've never supported Trump myself, and still still and don't. I have thought a lot of times, is it possible that, yeah, he really is the outsider. But I see a lot of people, more and more of my sort of generation, saying that no, he's the greatest psyop of all time.
My
He's
son is
the
moving in that direction.
yeah, and
They're looking at an interview with like Webster Tarpley, and things
mm,
like this, where and
well,
and the Tucker thing. It's interesting.
yeah, well, you see, for instance, like, one thing that seems sort of inarguable to me, um, and again, I'm saying this all just sort of, expressing, because I really feel like this is all we're all kind of like putting out possibilities, because none of us can
Yeah, we don't
know.
know. Yeah.
So I'm not being adversarial in any way, but I see that, like with this sort of technological control grid, that's being installed,
Yeah.
with, digital
Yeah,
ID,
yeah, yeah.
mass surveillance taken to a new level. Um, there was just this meeting with all the big, tech heads, except for the head of NVIDIA, who met with Trump the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the outward impression is, well, they're all bending the knee to Trump. The other sort of interpretation is that, well, and I'm just being speculative, if you wanted to get conservatives, and especially if you wanted to get armed men to assent to the construction of a cage around them, you would have to do it with someone who they thought was going to save them. In the same way for the liberals, you'd need to get a sort of Obama figure, and I think this maybe is what Mamdani is being prepped to be.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Sure.
that you'd need to get someone who people thought was the savior to assent to their own enslavement. And so I don't know, that's
Yeah. Wow, what
so
a great.
so
Yeah.
that's sort of one yeah. So I don't know, with Trump, I don't know, but one thing I am certain of is he's not he will be removed when it's the right time for him to be removed. This is something I very much, I think JD Vance is the one who is really supposed to be in there. And one can go look and see what Steiner said this, what the Antichrist's name would be like.
Uh-huh.
I forget what it is, but it's something like, James, Brinkley Smith. I think that's, something like that was the name that Steiner put forward as the name of the
Really,
Antichrist.
I never saw that.
Isn't that fine? Just kind
That's
of
like
yeah.
a three-part Anglo
J.D.
kind of
Vance.
name.
Yeah.
JD Vance has changed his name like 3 or 4 times. His background, no one really knows. He was sort of plucked out of obscurity. Peter Thiel and others sort of funded him all the way through. He got this immense, book deal. He got a Netflix, special. He made a bunch of money. He suddenly kind of gets swept into Congress, and then he's the vice president. It's very strange, sort of how quickly he was sort of, entered into this, and now he's at the helm. And I have a deep suspicion that Trump will not complete his term. JD Vance will take over, and he's the one who's supposed to carry forward the next stage. I
Wow. Yeah, you said
really
that.
think
I've
that's
heard.
going to happen.
I do hear that's growing amongst a younger generation too. Yeah, it's
Really?
interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I've heard.
I'm not saying it's like yesterday's news, but that's the
Well,
thing I
yeah.
see emerging too.
Yeah.
The Peter Thiel thing, like again, like look at the easy bait and switch.
Yeah, I don't get that. I don't get him at all.
But again, it's so easy to move from Epstein to like the new outrage machine because it was getting hot for Epstein. We'll see if Massey
Yeah.
can pull it off. But like all of a sudden,
Yeah.
everybody's just like Peter Thiel's 4 lectures on the Antichrist. It's really
Yes. Yeah.
wild, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and again, how quickly they can shift us.
Yeah.
So this is great. I'd say in 2 weeks, Philip, maybe same bat time, same bat channel, Michael. We'll have
Yeah.
Philip with Guido on, and this can kind of lead into Guido's new book. But this is great, Philip. I'm going to link
Thank
to
you
your
so much for the time.
Substack. I'm going to link to your Substack.
Oh, thank you.
And Michael, close us out. Yeah.
So, and one last quote
Please,
from to reset with Chesterton. He's talking about the how snotty the British were 100 years ago about the Irish and their superstition. And he says its tendency is to exhibit the Irish as odd because they see fairies. Its trend is to make the Irish seem weird and wild because they sing old songs and join in strange dances. But this is quite an error. Indeed, it is the opposite of the truth. It is the English who are odd because they do not see fairies. It is the inhabitants of Kensington who are weird and wild because they do not sing old songs and join in strange dances. There you go.
Now, the English could not
can
see
take that
fairies
one
is
to the
basically
bank.
his Preparata's basic thesis for all of his works. The English cannot see fairies.
That's right.
It is. It's just this kind of objective thing. Steiner gets at it too by saying, the English continent, when the evolution of consciousness, the England represents this severed brain, right? Not connected to the life. Yeah. Some beautiful stuff there. So we shall continue. Philip, I'm sure
Thank
you're
you
going
so
to be
much
a
for the
fan
time.
favorite. Yep. We've got these fan favorites that emerge. And thanks for the conversation. It just got
Thank you both so
more
much. I
and
really
more
appreciate
real
it.
as it went on. We'll talk offline soon too.
Fun.
Michael,
Thank
have a
you.
great week.
Thank